Okay, hi, everyone. In this editing guide, I'm going to talk a little bit about color grading and about gradient maps in particular. I'm sure there is a technical definition of color grading. I think of it as adjusting the colors or tones in an image in order to achieve a particular look or feel or mood. And it's very much a part of my regular workflow, generally at the end of the editing process or near the end of the editing process. And I do some form of color grading in one way or another on basically every image I edit. What we're looking at now is a photograph from Skakit Beach in Eastham, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. It's a sunset photo and it's along the editing process, but not quite finished. And I'm not going to try to illustrate exactly what I did in the actual editing of this photo because it was too hard for me to figure it out, to be honest. But we're going to use it as an example. So this is the photo from maybe 80% the way through the uh, editing process. And I've got a folder here, a folder that contains a bunch of layers, adjustment layers, of color grading with gradient maps. And I'm just going to click on it. This isn't meant to illustrate the right way or even my preferred way of editing this photo. I slapped these layers together in just a couple minutes before doing this, just by way of example. So right now, those layers are obscured. I'm going to activate them. And you can see very quickly there's a dramatic change in the look and the feel and the tones of this image. This is with the color grading activated, and this is with it off. So you can see there's a great deal of power. Whether you like it or not may be another matter, but there's a great deal of power contained in this. So we're going to walk through a little bit um, and talk about using gradient maps. There are quite a number of tools, almost an infinite number of tools used for color grading. There are several that I use regularly, but this is the one I'm going to talk about today. So the first step to using a gradient map is to go to the Layer menu and select New Adjustment Layer, Gradient Map. And you want to set the mode, the blending mode, to soft light. Oops, soft light. And reduce the opacity. I usually set it to 34%. Uh, there's no particular magic to that. It's just what I tend to do. I find it works. If you set it too high, you'll see it's overwhelming. Too low, not enough. So I find that somewhere in that 34% tends to work. And you can see there's a gradient that has appeared here, and that looks pretty terrible. Um, so it's a lot of trial and error. So I'm going to click on this, and it will bring up the dialog box for gradients. And you're going to see that there are a lot of gradients here, probably more than you have on your computer. And that's because you can download these for free from the internet. Just Google Photoshop gradients. And so I have an awful lot of them. Um, and this is a cumbersome way to do it. And I'm gonna show you a shortcut in a moment. But I'm just gonna start clicking on them. And you will see that's a pinkish one. And here are some blues and browns. Blues and browns tend to work well for this kind of image, although there's obviously a very bright line there. But you can see in general that it very quickly gives a different look. That one is fairly realistic. It's a subtle one. It brings out the pinks. I'll turn it off. Oops, I have to close that. I apologize. Turn it off, turn it on. It brightens it and brings out some of the colors. Um, so you can change the opacity. You can also use a layer mask here that is added automatically. And you can brush out some of it so that the gradient map doesn't get applied to certain parts of your image. All pretty straightforward. So to give you an idea of how you can use these in a more sophisticated, stacked way, we'll go in here. I will activate it and then turn these all off. And this is just the base. It tends to start with just a black and white layer, and that's not meaningful for our purposes. So here's the first one, the second one, the third one, and finally the fourth one. And you'll see that I have blacked out the application of the fourth one to the sky, because if I deactivate this layer mask by hitting Shift click, the thing is very slow today. You'll see that I don't like the way it looks in the sky. So I turned it off so that this pinkish layer would control what the sky looks like. And then I added a curves layer just to add a little more contrast and brighten things up. Um, So that's gradient maps in a very, very short um, overview. I'm going to uh, I'm going to show you a cool shortcut though that I discovered completely by accident that makes working with these both a great deal easier and a great deal more powerful. Now you see now when I want to use a gradient, I click on this and it brings up this dialog box. And I have to select one and close out of it. And it's a little bit cumbersome if I want to experiment. But what I discovered by accident is if you go up to the menu here and you go to Window, Gradients, that will put the window there. And then if you drag it into your sidebar, you can see when you drag it in, there's a blue highlight, and release it. Gradient maps now start give you a way to be used in a whole new way. So I'll once again select Adjustment Layer, Gradient Map, Soft Light, 34%. Okay, and it will start with this one. But now what happens is when I click gradients up here in the, I don't even know what this is called, in the sidebar, you'll see they're all here. And I can very quickly just click through them, clicking quite randomly now. No opening up a dialog box, no closing out of the dialog box, none of that. So this one does a nice job. No, it doesn't. This one does a kind of a nice job on the sky. You can see it's way too much, but now what the layers get treated differently when it's done this way, and I honestly don't know why. So we have a base gradient map layer upon which various fills are applied. So I can control the opacity. The opacity of each additional layer fill defaults to 100%, but you can dial each one down. So now the sky is looking a little more realistic. I can turn it off, turn it on, and we're just bringing the pinks out a little bit more. But it sure does look pretty terrible in the mud down here. So here's the cool thing that I found by accident. If I remain on this layer and I click another gradient, it will affect that layer. I'm going to undo that. But for reasons I don't understand, if you go back to this base layer, the one with the little icon of the gradient, and then you click a different gradient, let me find one that might work. It adds a new layer. So the pink one is preserved, and it's added a new one. So what I'm going to do is drag this to the top, and I'm going to turn it off. So now you can see the pink part of the sky that this first layer is controlling, and this one. And this one does a reasonably nice job on the mud color, the sand color. You can see the pink one looks horrible on the sand. This one does a reasonably nice job. So we'll just go to the layer mask here, turn up the opacity of our brush, and we'll just paint that out. Now this is not perfect, but you get the idea. You can stack them and use one layer gradient map to control a part of the image and a subsequent stacked gradient map to control another part of the image. And if you want to continue to experiment, you can turn that off for now, go back to this base layer. I'm just going to pick something crazy and click on a new one. We'll drag that up to the top and you can see what that does by itself. Not very good. But we can keep exploring. And what I want to do is I want to get something that gives this mud a realistic look, something in the brown to brownish yellow look at the bottom. I'm going to, no, that's pretty terrible. So I'm just going to try one or two more and not keep you sitting here all day. That one is reasonably good, given that getting sand to look like sand is one of the most difficult things there is. And I bet if we take this opacity down a little bit, a little too much, so that we're now blending this orange one with this down here, but we don't want to apply it to the top. So again, we're going to brush out the sky on this layer so that we keep our pink. Oops, I've done this backwards. Okay, so now we have the sky. And I'm going to drag this down here. And there's the sand, while we are still protecting the sky and allowing the pink layer to control the sky. And this one I don't like at all. So I'm going to group these. I'm going to put these all in a group. And now you can see this is with the gradient maps and without. With and without. And you can see it makes a dramatic impact on the look and feel, and certainly on the histogram of the image. Um, and it lets you shape your image and your colors the way you want. You can, of course, add a layer mask to the group itself and, you know, take the colors down a little bit. So by painting black on here, that means that everything in this group, all of these gradient map colors over here, are not going to be applied to the base image. And so there's a little less color here that acts almost like a vignette. I hope that makes sense. I hope it at least illustrates the incredible power that these layers can have to bring out colors and to shape the tones and mood and feel of your image. Um, it's something worth experimenting with. I'm sure in subsequent guides we will talk about other ways of color grading your images. Have fun with this.